Hello and welcome. Now, halfway through his first term as Nigeria's president, Bola Tinubu has defended the sweeping economic reforms enacted by his administration, insisting they're beginning to yield positive results. The president made the remark in his speech where he outlined his achievements in office over the last 2 years. Now, in the speech, Tinubu boasted of his administration's progress, touting significant economic growth and a nearly 500% surge in Nigeria's external reserves from $4 billion in 2023 when he took over to over 23 billion naira by the end of 2024. Tinubu also praised Nigeria's latest GDP report, highlighting a 3.19% growth in Q2 2024, signaling economic recovery and resilience. The president also highlighted advancements in the removal of fuel subsidies, the devaluation of the naira, and the establishment of what he calls a corruption-free exchange rate. According to Tinubu, the economic measures were necessary to avert severe fiscal crisis that would have led to runaway inflation now and a plunging of the naira and, of course, an economy on a free fall. He further assured that his government is on course to building a greater, more economically stable nation. He, however, acknowledged the pain of his reforms, adding that he did not take the patience of Nigerians for granted. Now, since assuming office in May 2023, Tinubu has implemented a series of bold policy changes now aimed at stabilizing the economy. His administration has described the reforms as essential for fixing Nigeria's strained public finances. Joining me now to discuss this further is the Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf, for joining us on the program. First of all, give me your overall assessment now of, the president's, the economic performance now of this government over the past 2 years.
Well, we can look at the economic performance from three major perspectives. There is a macroeconomic perspective. There is the issue of production and productivity in the economy. And there is the social effect, of economic governance over the last 2 years. On the macroeconomic front, just as you narrated in your intro, we have seen some significant improvement, particularly when we situate the performance against the backdrop of all the legacy macroeconomic issues that were inherited by this administration. The administration inherited practically a broken macroeconomic situation, where the external sector practically collapsed. The fiscals were in a very terrible shape. The balance of payment position was in a very terrible state as well. So the economic fundamentals were practically broken. So we can say that in the last 2 years, part of the things that have been achieved is trying to fix this broken macroeconomic fundamentals. And that is why one could at least give some credit to the administration for the restoration of some stabilization, restoration of some stability around the macroeconomic conditions, particularly when we look at the exchange rate, for instance, the slight deceleration in inflation, the improvement in the fiscal position, the improvement in the balance of payment position. So if you look at it at that level, we can score the performance to be fairly good. But if you look at it from the point of view of productivity and production, productivity is still a very big issue in this economy, which is affecting competitiveness, cost of production, cost of goods and services, and all of that. So productivity is still a major issue. And the productivity issues are driven largely by the infrastructure condition. Again, one can also argue that it's not easy to fix all the infrastructure situation within a space of 2 years, because we have seen a decadence over the decades of this infrastructure. On the social front, talking now about the cost of living, the welfare of the citizens, the reforms had been very devastating. You know, our cost of living has gone very, very high because of inflation, our cost of transportation and all of that. So it has really affected the poverty situation. So much so that you have a lot more people in poverty. So the pain, particularly among the vulnerable segments of the society, have been very, very considerable and significant. So broadly, that is the way one could, do an overview of what the last 2 years has been.
And let's talk about that pain now. The president did acknowledge that in his speech, saying that the reforms have actually been difficult and that he acknowledged that they've actually caused pains and that going forward, citizens will begin to see a clear difference. They will begin to see, if you like, a reduction in these pains, that you're going to have some kind of recovery. So what are the areas you think the president, we've had the reforms now. It's not as if we've seen the end of the reforms. Some of them are actually long-term. But what are those areas that you would expect the president to begin to concentrate on to ensure that these reforms begin to yield positive results now in terms of whether it's the cost of living, the standard of living of the people, that people have more money in their pockets and that they're able to feed better?
Well, I think the government needs to prioritize policies that will bring down the cost of living. And these policies need to be very specific and properly targeted, as bringing down the cost of food, for instance, the cost of transportation, the cost of education, and the cost of health care. Those things are very basic. And this will require the deployment of a mix of policies. Fiscal policies around taxation and tariff policies, for instance. We could have targeted policies to tackle all these issues. We could also have issues around, the cost of finance, because right now, the cost of finance is extremely very prohibitive. Because if we talk of interest rates of over 30%, 35%, that is quite high. So that needs to be addressed. Then both the federal government and the subnationals also need to work in collaboration. Because each time we talk about economic challenges, we talk about the pains of the reforms, we often overlook the role of the subnationals. The subnationals also have a big role to play, to contribute to issues of food production, rural infrastructure, education, and health. Because their own income, as a result of these reforms, has also improved significantly.
Yes, that's
so
true.
We need to see them, putting a lot more on the table in these areas, including mass transit, transportation, so that the cost of transportation can also go down a little. An issue of security. Both the subnationals and the federal government have a lot more to do. Because if security is affecting food supply, then that also has implications for poverty. So both the subnationals and the federal need to also review their strategies. The government have been throwing a lot of money on defense, on security, but the outcomes are not reflecting the amount of resources that are being deployed. So something is not adding up, as far as this insecurity is concerned. So those are the things I think we need to do to specifically target the cost of living crisis, which is the most urgent, in my view, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, you did talk about the cost of education as well, and I was going to ask you what you make of that novel introduction, if you like, of NEL Fund. That's the Nigeria Student Education Loan Fund. Helping students now to access interest-free loans that they're expected to pay back 2 years after graduation and upon, of course, securing jobs. So how pivotal would you say that initiative has been in terms of cost, in terms of education now for our young people?
Well, it is a novel idea in this part of the world, but it is a model that works better in the advanced economies. Personally, I will favor a lot more of subsidizing education. Making it affordable for any student that wants to, go in for tertiary education.
But education is already subsidized in this country. So how much subsidized do we want it to be?
No. You see, for instance, the whole idea of the loan is to subsidize education for the vulnerable segments. Mm-hmm. It's still a concept of subsidy. But what I'm saying is that rather than go through the process of, saying that you should apply and you have all sorts of stories about how these things are being administered, let us keep the cost of education as low as it can be. For instance, if tuition is free, for instance, in the universities, you don't need to go through the rigor of application and all of that. You just go apply and you enjoy the benefits of the free education. I think it is much better and more impactful than this route of let's put the resources into subsidizing the system so that there will be affordability. People will be able to afford whatever the cost is eventually. That, for me, I think is a better option than this loan thing.
I'm just wondering whether the government can actually, I'm not just talking about the federal government, even state governments can actually afford free education, free tertiary education.
No, it may not be free, DEJI, but let us make it as affordable as it can be. Let us deploy these resources that we are spending on the loan. Let us make it available to these institutions. Let us see how low it will go. So that, because right now, there are many children of many poor people that can still not even access the loan. So I believe that subsidy, depending on the resources that is available, is a much better approach as far as education is concerned. After all, the children of the elites, they don't attend our public tertiary institutions anymore. Most of them, their children attend the private tertiary institutions or they go abroad. It is the children of the average families and the low-income group that attend these public tertiary institutions. So it's already targeted in a way. So let us deploy those resources to those institutions. If the school fees currently was maybe around 400,000, 500,000, if you bring it down to 300,000 or 250,000, that will go a long way, and it will save a lot of people the rigor of having to go to apply and be hearing all sorts of issues, whether the funds has been deployed, whether it has been, all these issues. I think we can save ourselves the trouble of the administrative challenges of managing this fund. And in any case, even if they finish school, where are the jobs? Where are the jobs to pay back? That is another hurdle down the road. So it is better, in my view, to make it as affordable as it can be, so that everybody can have access.
No doubt. Where are the jobs? But then it's still a very good idea, at least, that we have this. This was something we never had before. If some of us actually had this opportunity when we were in school, probably things would have been easier for us. And the whole idea, as we understand it, is that people are able to access the loan irrespective of their social status. But let me ask you this, Doc.
DEJI, you enjoyed subsidized university education, didn't you? It was heavily subsidized, even in my own time.
Yeah, of course we all enjoyed subsidy. There's no doubt. And the subsidy is still in place. But I'm just saying it probably would have been much easier for us if we had access to this. Because remember, this loan, we're not just talking about the institutional payment of fee. You have the institutional fees, but then you also have the part that has to do with upkeep. I remember how difficult it used to be for me, providing, getting money for upkeep. It wasn't easy for my parents at all. But that's just by the way. But let's talk about inflation, Doctor. The government has the ambitious target of bringing down inflation to somewhere around 15%. But then you look at what it is at the moment, over 20%. And of course, we're beginning to see some easing, if you like. But do you think that 15% tax, first off, how would you assess the management of inflation, especially by the central bank now. And this target of 15%, how achievable is it?
Well, I think it's a fairly tall order, but again, it depends on what progress we are able to make. But I doubt whether I'll be able to achieve that by the end of the year. But my view is that the inflation, the kind of inflation that we are dealing with is driven largely by cost, by supply, what we call supply side issues. You know, cost of production, cost of transportation, cost of power, cost of energy, and all those things. You know, so for me, there is only so much that you can achieve with monetary policy. Monetary policy can bring some value, but we cannot over-rely on monetary policy. That is why I personally feel concerned at the extent to which we have gone in monetary policy tightening, which has led to a situation where interest rate is now between 30 to 35%, which itself is a very big issue for those who are investors and for those who are entrepreneurs. So my view is that we should concentrate a lot more on bringing down the cost of production, the cost of logistics, you know, looking at things like taxation where possible, looking at things like import duty, concession for those who are in production and things like that. So policy should be targeting more at how to bring down production cost, so that through that we can have, you know, a cascading effect of a reduction in production costs that could eventually translate into a reduction in prices. I think we have a much bigger issue on the supply side than on the monetary side. That is my view.
And how would you assess the performance of the government in the past 2 years in terms of, you know, improving revenue now from non-oil sector? I mean, the growth in that sector that we have seen.
No, the improvement has been phenomenal in terms of non-oil revenue. If you look at the numbers, I mean, we have a lot more income now coming from even non-oil revenue. In fact, there have been instances when the NNPC was not even remitting anything significant to the Federation account. And yet, we had significant revenue coming from this subsidy savings and the exchange rate unification. You know, of course, and VAT and company tax. A lot of revenue has been coming from there, but we can have a lot more if the environment were much better, you know, than what it has been. So if you have a much better environment, we see a greater growth in investment, better profitability, more jobs, and eventually more revenue to government. So that is why it is important to look at the cost of doing business. If we're able to bring down the cost of doing business, ultimately down the road, the government will be able to get more revenue because we have been able to grow the quantum of investment in the economy. For me, I think that's a better strategy than to be chasing revenue from the get-go. You know, from the investment phase, from the importation of raw materials and all of that. There's too much pressure on investors at that level. We should be waiting for the investment to grow, then they declare more profit, and we reap the revenue from there. That, for me, is a much better sequence of chasing revenue.
Now, let's talk about the big one, the oil sector. I mean, there's no question at all that we've seen some progress there. Reform, of course, beginning to yield results. We've seen investments returning and all of that. But you look at it very closely. Our numbers were down initially. Now they're gradually going up. But how would you assess the past 2 years of the oil industry? And what do you think we need to do now, you know, to ensure that, for instance, we're able to at least get close to that target that the government has of over 2.5, or is it 2.1 million barrels or so per day for this year?
Yes. You know, there are two major segments of the oil and gas sector. You have the upstream, you have the downstream. Now, the downstream, we have seen significant progress, especially following the subsidy and following what we have seen with the Dangote refinery and some efforts by the government-owned refineries to come on stream. because for close to 2 decades, we have not seen anything like domestic refining of petroleum products. So that is a major transformation that has taken place. So we are hoping that we see more refineries on board because it has a major impact on our macroeconomic environment, on our import substitution objective, on the pressure on our foreign exchange, and the conservation of foreign exchange, which ultimately will help, to help our balance of payment and so on. That is why we have been having lately balance of payment surplus, So at the downstream level, the reform has been very, very impactful. It has created a much better environment for investors to go into downstream operations. On the upstream, the government has been doing a lot, first in the area of security, to tackle all this problem of vandalization of pipelines and so on and so forth. That has had some effect, although we are not where we should be yet. Secondly, the government within the context of the PIA has also been giving a lot of incentives to those who are foreign investors, especially in the deep waters. We are seeing a lot of investment in that. We are seeing a lot of investment even in gas, because we now have a new package of incentives, to encourage more investment in gas. So there's a lot that is going on. Perhaps the impact is yet to begin to crystallize or to manifest. But there's a lot that government has put in place in that space. And only recently the government, had to reorganize the management of NNPC. And practically everybody has commended the new team. The expectations are very high that this new team will take the NNPC to a much higher level, to a level that is comparable to what we have in Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Qatar, and the rest of them. That is our expectation, given the quality of the team that the government has put in place at the NNPC. So for me, I think there's a lot to look up to.
There's something I want to ask you. Something I want to ask you about the downstream sector now, and that has to do with refining. I mean, it's a very good thing that we have Dangote refinery and a couple of other modular refineries now in the country refining, and we're seeing the impact of this, especially the Dangote refinery. We're seeing the impact on pricing and all of that. I mean, you don't have scarcity anymore. But then there's this contention as to whether the Dangote refinery and some other modular refineries in the country are able to meet the local consumption of this country. Because as we speak today, the country still imports petrol. I mean, about 50%, if not more than that, of the petrol consumed in the country is imported. And Dangote continues to maintain that, look, it has the capacity to meet local demand. So the question is, if he has the capacity to meet local demand, why then are we still importing? Why this issue? Because, I mean, I had a chat with him not quite long ago, and he complained bitterly that, look, the capacity is there. Already he's exporting to other countries, including the United States of America. So what's your take on this?
Well, I think we need to do a bit of economic nationalism here. Because for things like this, we have to be deliberate in ensuring that we support domestic production, domestic investment, and that is good, for self-sufficiency, and more importantly, for our energy security. Now, my view is that perhaps there have been some, vested interest in the importation ecosystem, who are not keen about, letting go as far as importation is concerned. But now the president has announced Nigerian first policy, although that is a procurement policy for the public sector. But the spirit of that is that we should not be importing what we have the capacity to produce domestically. And I'm hoping that that spirit will be extended to things like, the domestic refining of petroleum products. Because if you have a country where we complain about pressure on foreign exchange, we complain about the exchange rate, and we have the opportunity, a real opportunity for that matter, to ease the pressure on the foreign exchange? Why must we insist that we should continue to import? Some people have argued about issues of monopoly and all of that, but it is neither here nor there. Because, I mean, the door is open for any other person to invest in refineries. The Dangote is not stopping any other person. We have 4 refineries owned by government. They can post competition if they put their hearts together. You know, and for a competition to be fair, the playing field must be level. You cannot be saying that you are using imports to compete with locals. I don't think it's a fair competition because the environments are not the same. So I think we need to be a lot more nationalistic from an economic point of view to ensure that we don't allow that kind of thing to happen. Except in exceptional circumstances where it is proven sincerely that the local capacity doesn't exist. That is when that kind of thing should happen. So it's a governance issue. I think it's something that the government needs to look into critically and see how we tidy up that aspect of our economic governance.
Finally, I have to ask you this. We've seen the government roll out some measures now to support local manufacturing. You know, quite a number of measures, even in terms of grants, making provision for, you know, even, well, at least low interest loans and all of that. But you look at the manufacturing sector going forward, the next 2 years, for instance, what agenda would you be setting for the president to ensure that our manufacturing sector begin to perform at optimal level, especially now that we have the AFCTA?
Well, manufacturing is very heavy on infrastructure. I'm talking of productivity in manufacturing now. Because the challenge we have with production and manufacturing generally is the issue of productivity. And it's a question of largely of the structural environment, particularly issues of power and issues of logistics. To some extent, even issues of financing. And these are not things that you can fix immediately. So we need to see a lot more drive in fixing the power sector, for instance. It's a fairly complex environment for those who have studied it very, very well. Because as we speak now, there's a huge subsidy now that the government is still struggling to clear. The GENCOs are still saying that the government is owing them about 4 trillion naira. And a lot of the debt is already accumulating on the back of that. So we need to fix the power sector. I know it can be very challenging. There are issues of tariff, there are issues of all sorts of issues, because it's a chain. So fixing the power sector is critical. Fixing logistics is also very critical, because manufacturing is heavy on the movement of raw materials and the movement of goods. So there's a heavy logistics component in the manufacturing cost and the delivery of the products to the consumers. So logistics is key, and that is why I will also urge the government, whatever facility we are even taking in terms of loans, we should prioritize rail transportation all over the world. The best way to deal with logistics is to have a developed, advanced rail transportation. That should be the priority, so that across the country, goods can move freely, and that will crash costs. We should not be moving petroleum products on road. It's very expensive. The same thing, raw materials, the same thing, agriculture, everything is on road. It makes the economy to be grossly inefficient. So dealing with logistics and dealing with issues of power will go a long way in supporting manufacturing productivity, and also issues at the ports, administrative issues too, and all of that. Because the bureaucracy sometimes can even be a cog. So that's a whole lot. But the biggest issues are power and logistics, to be able to fix our manufacturing sector, and indeed anything that has to do with production, including agriculture, including solid minerals. These things need this very solid infrastructure support.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, thank you very much for coming on the program and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, DEJI.
Opinions are free, facts are sacred, but truth is universal. How, in practical terms, can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
President must see himself as the President of the Federal Republic.
We know where the enemy is. 3 places. The Lake Chad Basin, the border area between Nigeria and Cameroon, and then the Sambisa Forest.
On DEJI 360, we give you a complete dose of everything. Opinion, facts, and undiluted truth.
I hardly believe what politicians say in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.
We delve into the issues, dissect it so that you can understand it, and use it to take action.
I don't think there's any need for any governor to look for grant for ranching.
DEJI 360, dissecting the issues.